So we'll just go ahead and go right into the meditation, using the bell to settle in. And notice that the body is sitting. Sitting is like this. Generally, with your sitting posture, you want to be regal but relaxed. Sitting upright if you can, and relaxed at the same time. And you can also notice that the body is breathing. There's a rhythm to breathing. You can just feel that. And you might notice that you're being breathed. You're not actually doing anything. The breath is just happening. You're being breathed. So there's a kind of consent or relaxation to that. Just feeling that rhythm of breath happening, almost in the same way the ocean has a constant natural rhythm to it. And often when we come to meditation, we might have a lot of thoughts and experiences from the day. And they can be like waves on the surface of the ocean on a windy day. You don't have to do anything about them, but you can just drop down below your head, below the surface of the water, and just feeling that rhythm of breath, almost like dropping down to the currents below the surface of the water where the waves are. Don't have to get rid of anything. We're just dropping lower in your being. Letting those thoughts and feelings just be up there, moving around as you drop deeper into the body, below the waves, into those subtle current of breath. It's like the current below the waves. And if you pop back up in the thoughts or emotions, that's fine. Just noticing that and coming back down, the rhythm of breathing. And if you can, let each breath carry you deeper and deeper into the ocean, till you're at the depths of your being in your actual somatic body here, or in that image of being at the bottom of the ocean where nothing is happening. It's just that rock bottom of your being that's calm and quiet. And that's always here too, just like the waves on the surface are here, your breath is here, your essence at the very bottom of your being in the ocean is also always here, immovable, vast. Your depth is always here. And if you can drop down into that, then doing so and resting there. You might still notice the breathing, just letting it inform the depths of who you are, inform that silent beingness that's here now. For the rest of the meditation, you can either rest in this quiet depths of your being or in the rhythm of breathing, If you've noticed, you've popped back up to the thinking at the surface of the ocean. It's dropping back down. Everything's a vertical. It's all right here at the same time. So you don't really have to worry about what's here. It's just dropping down to deeper places of you. Don't have to get rid of anything or create anything. And again, just dropping down in the last 5 minutes, dropping back down into the rhythm of breathing if you went to thinking, or that depth, that silence of your being. And in the last 5 minutes, you can widen it. You can widen the calm of the breathing, or you can widen the calm at your depth. Make it as wide as your body. Make it as wide as the room. Make it infinitely wide. The calm that you can touch in your body, make it infinitely wide for the last few minutes. And just resting in that calm, whether it's small or wide, infinite wide calm you can abide in the last few minutes.
Good evening, Sangha, and welcome to our Dharma Talk series. It's good to see you all, and I'm very excited to introduce Amita, who will be talking about Anatta, which is, or the topic of not self, or the teaching of not self, which happens to be one of my favorite of the Buddhist teachings. And one that seems to lead to some of the liveliest discussions in our groups, and one that seems to be very difficult for most people to grasp, but I think that grasping is the problem. Amita Schmidt has been teaching Vipassana meditation for over 25 years and was the resident teacher at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts for 6 years. She is also a licensed psychotherapist specializing in healing trauma and the author of the book Deepa Ma, The Life and Legacy of a Buddhist Master, which I have read and highly recommend. Whether you know who she is or not, it's a wonderful book. And before I turn it over to Amita, I also just wanted to say a few words about Dana. So which is if you're unfamiliar, it's the Pali word meaning generosity. So it doesn't mean giving money. It is a way of engaging with the Dharma. And Amita, like most teachers that we have at Insight San Diego, doesn't get paid for teaching events like these. She shares the Buddha Dharma out of generosity, and then she is in turn supported by the Sangha and the generosity of the community. So if you would like to continue that tradition by supporting, you can send Dana electronically, and I'll put the link to her to how you can do that in the chat a couple of times during the talk. And then just as a reminder, please keep your microphone muted throughout the event unless you're asking a question or making a comment during the discussion period. And also the talk and discussion will be recorded. So if you prefer not to be on that recording, you can ask a question via the chat, or you can turn your camera off. And I think it's always nice to have the cameras turned on just so the teacher feels like she's sharing to a group of people. But if you are moving about or eating or something, it would probably be best if you turned your camera off. So with that, I will turn it over to Amita. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I've never met the San Diego Sangha before, so it's really exciting for me to see some of you. And it's a Friday night. You could be doing a bunch of other things. So I was thinking earlier, like how cool it is that you showed up and that you want to meditate, of all the things you could be doing. I really appreciate you being here, and I really feel grateful to be asked to be here to teach. As you know, the talk tonight is about no self. So originally in Burma, now Myanmar, Dharma talks were given from behind a screen, like a screen like this. And there wasn't anyone in front giving a talk, because the idea was that it was just pure Dharma coming through. There was nobody there, no self there. And then later, when I did a retreat with U Pandita about 30 years ago, the Burmese monks would have a fan that they'd put in front of their face. So it got a little less no self, but the idea was still there. And in the first 500 years of Buddhist artwork, there actually wasn't a Buddha figure, a human figure represented. When the artwork wanted to depict the Buddha, they put an empty pair of shoes, a tree, or an empty chair. So the idea was in the artwork, they weren't trying to represent this personhood or a sense of self. So, we still have a kind of a current day representation of this no self concept from like the artwork, which is when we go into a meditation hall, we often take our shoes off before we go in. It's not just for cleanliness. It's the idea when you leave your shoes outside the door, you're leaving yourself outside the door. You're leaving your issues, your problems, your beliefs, and you're entering the hall empty of you, empty of self. So as we start on this topic of no self or not self, it's really important to note that in the teachings of the Buddha, he really, in the Pali Canon, he really avoided a debate about this question or subject of self. He wasn't into debating it. In the Samyutta Nikaya 44.10, when a wanderer asked the Buddha point blank whether there was a self or not, the Buddha remained silent. And later he explained to his attendant, Ananda, he said he remained silent because, quote, to respond either yes or no to this question would be to side with opposite extremes of wrong view, and that this question had no helpful answer that could be given, so it was best to remain silent. Also in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha advised all the monks to avoid getting involved in such questions as, what am I? Do I exist? Do I not exist? Because according to him, they led to answers like, I have a self or I don't have a self, both of which, according to the Buddha, is called a thicket of views, a writhing of views, a contortion of views that get in the way of awakening. So why even talk about no self then? Why is this attributed to the Buddha's teaching? No self is referenced in the Buddha's teachings because it's a strategy for awakening, rather than a philosophical debate. Some scholars reference this as the no self strategy of the Buddha. So before we go further, I want to look at some wording here. I've been using no self and not self in a kind of more fluid way. But there is technically a difference between the two words. The word anatta in Buddhism means no self, meaning there's no separate or permanent entity called you. More like self is a verb, an ever-changing set of causes and conditions, versus the noun we often imagine it to be. So this is the Buddhist word anatta, or no self. And then you have the word anatman, which in Sanskrit means not self. This is more like, this anatman is like anatta in that there's no permanent or separate you, but anatman additionally emphasizes the interconnected and interdependent nature of self. The idea that nothing exists in isolation or separation. So there's no permanent you, but there's also this interdependence. So an example of this might be, in order for us to breathe, our lungs need the trees. Our body needs the sun. There's this interdependent quality of things that exist here now. I'm going to be using both words interchangeably, but I want you to realize that I'm referring to both the absence of a separate you and this interdependent nature of you together. So this no self or not self, again, is not a philosophical doctrine or a debate, but it's a strategy of the Buddha. A strategy for what? Strategy for freedom. Freedom from suffering, liberation. The Buddha felt that the root cause of all suffering and all negative emotions was this belief in a separate self. So he's really passionate about this. Was like an important teaching. The root cause of all negative emotions was this belief in a separate self. So his not self strategy was a way of reverse engineering suffering, reverse engineering suffering. And he taught this illusion of a separate self, just as wasn't about you or I, it was in all things. He wrote it, he said in the Digha Nikaya 279, all phenomenon are not self, all phenomenon, not just you and I. So everyone and everything is empty of this separate existence. And per the Buddha, when you could see things accurately, that there's not a separate self, you just be aware of this empty phenomena rolling on. And that when you're aware of this empty phenomena, that things don't belong to you, we have a life-changing insight that can lead you to total liberation. So this was a big deal. His not self strategy was a way to total liberation. So Vipassana, the meditation that we practice, Vipassana actually means seeing clearly into the three things. V is three, Passana is seeing clearly into the three things that lead to liberation. What are these three things? They're suffering, impermanence, and anatta, or no self. They're called the three doorways for insight to happen. Supposedly, as when we awaken, we're pulled through one of these doorways. Our insights pull us through either the suffering door, the impermanence door, or the no self door. This is how awakening happens. So let's look at this not self strategy of the Buddha as one of these doors. He listed it, one of these doors that insight and awakening can happen. The first thing that happens when you believe in a separate self is there's a me here and a you out there. We create a divided state of subject on object, a divided state. I'm here and that's over there. And then a whole bunch of things ensue from there. Then we have to get things or push things away. And it becomes a whole lifetime of wanting, not wanting. U Pandita, my teacher, used to say that it was like you were always trying to seek things. And then once you got them, you were guarding them. So he would laugh and he'd go, you're always guarding or seeking, guarding or seeking. You're on one side or the other. And this is because of this belief in a separate self. One of my friends who's a meditation teacher and psychologist, he said he was watching his daughter one day. She was like getting close to age 3. And she'd normally a calm kid, right? And all of a sudden she grabbed her toy with anger and she said, mine. And he took a breath and he was like, okay, here we go. That sense of self came online and she all of a sudden realized she had my toy, that guarding and seeking. And this belief in a separate self, of course, it's developmental, it happens, and we're learning about being free of this. It starts early. It can create, if we don't have the awareness, it can create a struggle the rest of our lives. When I was 22 and I just started practicing, I went to my first job in Seattle as a social worker, and I was on the bus, taking the bus to work. And in front of the University of Washington, they had a big wall, and somebody had graffitied in huge letters on this big wall outside the university. They'd graffitied work, buy, consume, die. And here I was going to my first job, and I looked at that and I went, yeah, that kind of can sum up samsara. Work, buy, consume, die, if we're caught up in this separate me. So let's go deeper into this no self doorway. The Buddha spoke of the illusion of, quote, I making and my making. And probably the better lexicon for today's language would be selfing. It's like we're taking selfies all day long. And you know how, irritating that can be when you see somebody taking a lot of selfies. Well, we're doing this in our mind all day long. You can imagine the tension that creates. We don't even realize. We're identifying with our thoughts and emotions, And we don't just get to be that empty phenomenon rolling on that I talked about, because the self and this identification with the self becomes like a magnet or flypaper, and then everything sticks to it. So when a thought comes along or a feeling, they get stuck to you and you have to pull them off. And because they become my thoughts and my feelings, and then we're defending them and fighting for them. And it just creates this whole big like stuckness when it's just empty phenomena rolling on. Your thoughts are just a sound. They're just a sound. Imagine if your thoughts were no different than a bird song. Sometimes I encourage people to do that in meditation. Your thoughts are just a bird song. They'd just be sounds coming and going. You wouldn't grab onto them as the me, right? And, you can sometimes just watch. It's just that the mind is just an audio clip. If you have an audio clip in a file, and just to see it like that. But how does this illusion of selfing develop? We all seem to have it. How does it develop? The Buddha said the illusions comes from not seeing clearly into what's called the 5 aggregates. His primary not self strategy was mindfulness of the 5 aggregates. So what are these 5 aggregates? Their material form or the body, their feelings, and this is not emotions, but feeling, tone of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. That's always arising. Their perception, that's the 3rd. Mental formations is the 4th, and that does include thoughts and emotions. And the 5th is consciousness itself. These 5 things come together and make it seem like something's happening as a you. They create the illusion of a separate you. And the Buddha broke these 5 things down for us to see, almost like you'd slow down a movie so you could see the frames and see that it's not really what you think. When you slow a movie down, you can see, it's not what I thought. There's nothing here. So breaking these down into these 5 things is a way of reverse engineering the you again. The Buddha said, this is a deconstruction process. And the Buddha said, I gained absolutely nothing from perfect enlightenment, because it's a breaking down what you thought was here into these components where it's just empty phenomena rolling on. And Sufi mystic Rumi, his refrain in the later stage of practice was dissolver of sugar, dissolve me. So again, it's this dissolving process. And my teacher actually said to me one time, he said, Amita, when you start practicing, it's like you become a TikTok in the mouth of the unconditioned or the source. And you're just going to slowly dissolve back to the one. So a way of understanding these 5 aggregates of self, form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness is the analogy of the stars and the Big Dipper. So, there's really no Big Dipper there. There's just 7 stars in a pattern, right? But every time we look up at the sky and see it, we go, oh, there's the Big Dipper. And we have to kind of point it out and see it and name it. We're conditioned to see it, like the sense of self. We're conditioned to see those 7 stars. And it's not that there aren't stars there. It's that group of stars doesn't really represent anything other than what our minds created. We made up the Big Dipper. So there is a body, mind, consciousness, all these 5 things, but they don't represent a separate you. We're just made up of these 5 stars. So let's look at the Buddha's core teachings on dismantling this illusion of self via the 5 aggregates. The first one is material form. We identify with the body as self. And most Buddhists, we know this, we're not the body, right? If you pay attention to the body, it's pretty easy to see. It's out of our control. We have like these fragile water balloon bodies. It doesn't take much to injure them or break them or puncture them. And, we know we're going to die. That's pretty clear. So ultimately, it's hard to completely identify with self and the form, the self as form. When I was in my 30s, I was really blessed with a body worker who was also a mentor body worker. And she told me early on, she said, Mita, it's really good that your body ages. And I was like, why? And she said, well, when it's time to die and death is going to take your body, you're not going to argue with death. By the time you're 70, you're like, this body is suffering, everything's decaying and it's painful. You're not going to have some illusion about the body being this great thing, this wonderful form you need to hang on to. And I've never forgot that. It made me really, as I age and things start to, get more unpleasant, to just see that that's an appreciation that the form is not me and I don't need to hang on to the illusion of it being me. The next three aggregates, I'm going to combine them together, are feeling tone, perceptions, and mental formations or thoughts and emotions. And we identified most with this set of three, especially with the mind and emotions as me. In fact, we filter almost everything through our thoughts about it. We're addicted to our narrative. And most of the time, we prefer our thoughts to what's real. We'd rather we enjoy the narrative of something sometimes even more than the actual experience itself. And you might bring close attention throughout your day to, what's happening when you're going places. Is this the mind narrative that we're lost in, or are we in the actual? Because we're often experiencing our thoughts about things rather than experiencing things directly. It's mind on mind on mind on mind throughout the day. And not to judge yourself or berate yourself, just to start to see this, The other day when I was looking at this, I went to the beach here in Hawaii and I realized, wow, you're at the beach, this beautiful place, but then you're like looking at other people and having thoughts about them or about yourself, or about what you do in the ocean. And it's just like, here you're in this beautiful place and it's a thought movie going on top of what is this running audio clip, whether we see it or not, it's there. But the Buddha had a teaching to counteract this constant narrative, this audio clip. He did have a teaching. It's in what's called the Bahia Sutta, and a man named Bahia who was about to die. He didn't realize it. He only had a few seconds left. He asked the Buddha for the most succinct teaching. And the Buddha replied, in the scene, there is just the scene. In the herd, there is just the herd. And he went through all the sense doors in that sutta. But, what does this mean? It means that your eyes are not thinking. The eyes don't have thoughts. In the scene, there's just the scene. It means your ears are not thinking. Your ears do not have thoughts. In the herd, there's just the herd. The narrator or audio clip is extra, and the Buddha's trying to get us back to this bare attention without the audio clip, like turning the mute button on, resetting so we can see what's real, because our narrative's often in the way of the real. Narrator can be like a third wheel, or, often I always had the analogy the other day of the mind is like a wet sheet of paper between the real. It just gets in front of everything. So as a practice throughout the day, you can challenge this notion of this separate narrator you. You can challenge this notion. And how to do this? I have what's called a series, a couple of microdosing practices, and they're little practices you can do throughout the day, little reminders, kind of insight inquiry practices. And a couple of research studies have shown in the last couple of years that these microdosing, I call them micro practices, are actually almost as effective as an hour of sitting a day. One research study showed that. So they're powerful things to do, and they can loosen this narrator you. And I'm going to offer 2 microdosing practices for this and then 2 later. The first is to notice there aren't 2 minds. There's not a separate you talking and another you listening. There aren't 2 minds. There's only one awareness. There's only one sound. There's not 2. And just kind of remind yourself of that. There's not 2 here. The second microdosing practice is to look at the source of thought. Look at the source of thought. A great question to ask all day long is, what's the source of mind? You know, when that narrator comes in, when you're at the beach, what's the source of these thoughts? Where do thoughts come from? Mind is a secondary thing, a third wheel. And what we're trying to do is confirm and identify with the source, the awareness that's primary, rather than the secondary thing of mind. So you can use thoughts, instead of them being like psychic irritants, your thoughts, you can use them all day long as pointers to the source. The other day, Adyashanti mentioned in a talk, he said, you can slide down the I thought, like sliding down a pole back to the source all day long if you want. Slide down that I thought, slide down any thought, take it back to its origin. And if that's too confusing or difficult, or you can't identify with that, just notice the stillness that all thoughts come out of. The stillness. What would this moment be right now without your thoughts about it? Yeah, just that right there. This moment without your thoughts about it. And you can come back to that throughout the day. The last of the 5 aggregates, the Buddha talked about these 5 aggregates that we confuse as a separate self, is consciousness. So it really feels like we have a separate consciousness, and we often make consciousness another thing that we possess. My consciousness, my awareness. And we funnel everything through this small aperture called my consciousness. The Tibetans said that doing this is like seeing the world through a straw. This little you, right? Amita. And we're looking at everything through this little aperture of me called, my consciousness. And it's like looking at the sky through a straw. So when you can, imagine just taking away that, and it becomes the consciousness, the awareness. And then you're not filtering it through this limited you, but your consciousness can become the field it all happens in. Take away the straw and the consciousness can get bigger, can become this field it all happens in. And the other day, I woke up in the morning and my awareness was the whole room. It was everything all at once. It had moved out of that small me, and the awareness was everything. And it was really fun because I saw like, oh, Amita was no different than the chair or the window. I mean, it was still, the me was still important, but the awareness was everything all at once. It was kind of like a macro or totality consciousness. And it was beautiful in the time that was present to see that the needs and the clinging and the identification with anything in here just naturally fell away. And everything was included as one equal whole. Consciousness saw everything as one equal whole, rather than that tendency when it comes through us to make everything about me. So it was really fun. It was too bad it didn't last forever, but it was really nice to get a glimpse of this truth of, oh, when it's a bigger bigger totality consciousness, macro consciousness, this kind of clinging to self really just naturally is not there on its own. And you don't have to wait for something like that to happen. Just keep reminding yourself that you're the awareness, not my awareness, but the awareness. And you could think of it like, in the summertime in the Midwest, or some places, maybe you have lakes there, ponds, they cordon off a swimming area for kids to swim in. And, they put down the rope, and it's like you create the rope here. There's Amita here, there's Vic there, there's Irene, there are little ropes cordoning off our swimming area. But we do this in mind only. It's all the same lake. It's all the same water. And it's the ability to see that oneness versus the ropes that separate everything. And I'd like to do a visual, and finishing up with these 5 aggregates. I'd like to do a visual of, taking these 5 aggregates out, letting them go, and coming back to just the you, the field of awareness it all happens in. So this is the you. It's nice if you don't have your camera on. It's a glass bowl, and there's 4 little eggs in it, colored eggs. So we take the first one out. The first one is the body. We are not identifying with the body. The body's not me or mine. So we take that out. Then feeling tone. Feeling tone is not me or mine. The second aggregate. The third aggregate, mental formation or perception. Perception's not me or mine. The fourth aggregate, I made the golden egg, thoughts and emotions, because that's our golden egg, isn't it? Our thoughts. So that's not me or mine. Now we have the bowl left itself, this clear bowl, consciousness. You take that away, that's not me or mine. Okay, take away consciousness. Then you just have this. All you. All you, without identifying with any of those aggregates. You're the whole room. You take the straw away. So we're using this no self strategy to reverse engineer the you, to empty out the contents like the colored eggs. So you're in the context. You're in the context of it all. Which takes us back to the Sanskrit word anatman, or no self, the interconnected nature of self. And we're going to end on talking about this word. The anatman is this interconnected totality. And actually, it's fascinating. Some people in the science world are beginning to really verify this anatman, or no separate self. I don't know if any of you know Donald Hoffman, but he's a cognitive scientist with a PhD from MIT. And he and Bernie Katstroff, who's a computer engineer and philosopher, they've been having these discussions and doing research. And they claim that they can mathematically show that they're conscious agents that are fundamental and therefore beyond space-time. Donald Hoffman says this: there are conscious agents that are beyond space-time. They look like many, but are only one. They act like different agents, but are only one. From any 2 agents, you can get unlimited new qualia from their fusions, and yet there's only one agent. He then goes on to say, there is one fundamental consciousness. but Cantor's hierarchies of infinity precludes us from ever being able to describe the one because it has infinite representations. One fundamental consciousness with infinite representations. That's the not self. So a way of accessing this not self throughout the day is to orient to this source that I mentioned earlier. On a bigger level, you can do this by not getting caught up in the character in your daily movie, which means looking back at the projector. Make sure as a practice, look back at the projector. Where does all this form, thoughts, emotions, where do all these 5 aggregates come from? What's the light that makes it all happen? And then identify it only as the source, the light of the projector, not the impermanent aggregates. It's the same light creating Amita, Irene, Vic, Mari, the same light creating the planets, the plants, the ocean. Know yourself as the same light that creates everything. When you turn around and look, where's all this coming from? I have a nice picture. I'll just stop my video to show it, of this Buddha that's just all light. I mean, maybe you can see it. There we go. Yeah. It's just like the light is streaming through this Buddha. All light. That's the source appearing as a form, right? As the Buddha. And you can know yourself as that light that's streaming that form. So, even if you work with depression or anxiety, a lot of people I work with have, these kinds of difficulties. Just keep remembering, don't lose sight of the ultimate you, this light, because ultimately your awareness itself, or your essence, is never depressed. Your essence is never anxious. Your awareness itself is never stuck. And one day the other day I was talking to one of my students. She was really stuck and trying to make things, not getting things happy. Things are not happy for her. And I said, your character's never going to be happy in samsara. Your character will never get it right because it's impermanent here. And even if you get like one of these insights like that I had the other day, then it's gone. Or you get money, then it's gone. Or it's here, and job, and a person, and a joy and sorrow. It's the land of impermanence. One of my teachers said it was like trying to get things right in samsara is like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's like, you can get them in order and all nice and spiffy and stuff, but the ship is going down. So whatever colors you put on those deck chairs on the Titanic, and no matter how expensive they are and beautiful and wise those chairs are, they're going down. So know what's the deathless. The Buddha called it the deathless. What's the you that's below these 5 aggregates, these stories, these concepts. There's an Ojibwe saying, sometimes I go about in pity for myself, and all the while a great wind carries me across the sky. So it's this bigger thing. Know what this bigger thing is. Awareness. The awareness. And what's really fun and beautiful about awareness is it gives you all these possibilities. So you can like zoom in on a bug on your floor right now, infinitely zoom in on it. Or you can infinitely zoom out at the night sky tonight when you go outside. And this awareness, it's really cool. It can go on forever if you start experimenting with it. The taste of an orange can just keep going. A blessing, a meta blessing that you do can just keep going. not the flavor, the impermanent flavor of the orange or the impermanent sound of the blessing, but the awareness itself that holds it and produces it can just keep going. And when you know yourself as this totality, nothing can break you. Nothing can break you. And if things start getting confused with AI and what's real and what's not real, AI is artificial intelligence, for those of you who don't know, you'll know who you are. Nothing can break you. Who could be broken or die when you really know yourself as the awareness? And yet here we are, we have these finite fragile water balloon bodies, and our infinite awareness self. It's such a conundrum. One student wrote to me about her mother, who she took care of, who died of dementia. She said, "I could see my mother becoming infinite love, even as she seemed to be getting more and more confused in her thinking." The finite and the infinite. So in closing, I wanted to give 2 more of these microdosing practices, these little practices you can use throughout the day. And these are for the not man or not self strategy. So pretty much along the lines of what I already mentioned, looking back at the movie projector, try to see your character in the movie all day long. See yourself as a character in a movie. And one person said, "Oh, I don't know if I like that. It creates, a sense of an outsider me." And, we're not doing this to create depersonalization or dissociation. If that happens, don't do this practice. It's just here to create more wisdom for you. If it helps you go see yourself as a character in the movie, to unvelcro from your identification with yourself all day long, then do that, do that. I like to see this body and mind almost like an avatar in a game, like a video game. And so throughout the day, I'll just use this practice to bring awareness to my avatar and how she's moving in the game, and then watching everything in the game. It just becomes this playful curiosity of, there's just the pure awareness watching things be done and watching other characters, other avatars in the game. And I'm not getting so blended or attached to the me when I can do this, and I'm more watching how things happen than kind of fighting off life. When you're blended with a character, it becomes this fight, like I said, a me here and a there, and you have to protect. But when you're watching the avatar from awareness itself, it's just really fun. Oh, look, this is happening to the character now. Byron Katie, when somebody was about to take her life, she had the thought, "Oh, I wonder if this is how she dies." I wonder if this is how she dies. So again, it's moving to this macro awareness. And the last microdosing practice is to change out the I language as a practice. If you want to try this, it's really fun. So, in our culture, we've become really aware of making sure we have accuracy around pronouns. The he, she, or they now, right? So if we really want to be accurate, let's stop using the I language. It's just creating more illusion of a separate you. So train the mind with different language that's more inclusive, that's more accurate. So if we were going to use more accurate language, it might be awareness is seeing this, or life is doing this. Or sometimes I just play around because it could be true. Infinite love is doing this. That could be these pronouns for you. Instead of I'm driving the car, life is driving the car. Instead of I'm washing the dishes, infinite love is washing the dishes. Imagine what that does for the drudgery of you all day long. You could even try that now, instead of, you're listening to the talk, awareness or infinite love is listening to talk. Life, the screen, empty screen is giving the talk and listening. Life, awareness, infinite love. Switch out the pronouns. Have fun with this. And why we do this is because it weakens that wet sheet of paper that's between us and the real. And when that wet sheet of paper starts to weaken, the truth can discover you. The truth can discover you. That's all it ever is. True nature, the truth discovers you. You don't find it. Don't create that illusion. More and more, I'm finding that this practice, and I've been doing this for, gosh, it's embarrassing to say 40 years now. But more and more, I find it's about consent. Letting the truth just discover and consenting more and more. And the other day, I just had this feeling and image of, oh my God, this is a consent to 100% unconditional love. Inside and outside. It's a consent to 100% unconditional love or truth, whatever you want to call it. Same thing, love, truth. And I was like, a part of me was like, are you ready for that? It's not for the faint of heart, this consent. 24/7, forever. Unconditional love, 100%, forever, or truth, forever. That's what you're consenting to. So just feeling that's that commitment to the no self, the not self. All day long, consenting. I'd like to close with a poem by Dorothy Hunt, and it's called The Altar of the Present Moment. And it's about a 2-minute poem, so just relaxing and listening. And this poem exemplifies the different pieces of this talk about letting go of the 5 aggregates we cling to as me, and recognizing that you are the altar itself, that Anatman of interconnectedness. The altar of this moment. Place everything you can perceive, everything you can see, hear, smell, taste, or touch upon the altar of this moment and give thanks. It is over so soon, this expression, this single moment of your precious life, this one heart pounding itself open with fear or wild joy, this one breath rising in the cold winter air, smoothly and gently, or coughing and sputtering. Bow while you can before this one taste of afternoon tea warming its way to your belly, or the fragrant orange exploding its sweet juice in your grateful mouth. You have to love the antics of your mind, imagining life should only be sweet. The bitter makes the sweet, and life is both. It is whole, like you, before you think yourself into pieces. Place this moment's pain and confusion on the altar too, and give special thanks for such grace that wakes you up from sleeping through your life. Pain is greatly underrated as a pointer to unknowing, yet greatly overrated when taken as identity. In this moment, your eyes meet mine, and there is a single looking. What is peering from behind our masks? Can it touch itself across the room? Place your palms together. Touch your holy skin. In another moment, it will shed itself. What will you be then? What were you before you had two hands? What are you now? You cannot capture that and place it on the altar of this moment. It is the altar, and this moment's infinite expressions, and the seeing, and its own devotion to itself. You are that. You are that. The one and the all and the one. Consenting. So thank you for listening. I think it would be nice to take a short break, just for 5 minutes. Come back in 5 minutes, and we can have questions and answers. You can put some questions in the chat if you have them, or we'll do a raising the hand. So, in the 5 minutes, just let this percolate, just sit if you want. And I'll see you back in a few minutes, okay? Molly, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the idea of using this idea of the witness, where you're witnessing yourself. Because then I feel like I've tried to do that, but then I feel like, well, there's a me that's watching me do it. So I appreciate if you could expand on that a little bit, please. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And as Buddhists, we're so trained in being observers that we identify with the observer. I think that doesn't happen so much with the normal people. But yeah, and already the fact that you can see that is huge. But what is it that knows that you're an observer of the observer? Like, even though you think you're the observer and you've identified with that, what is it that knows that? Like, there really is this uber awareness. If you back up far enough with your mindfulness, you'll just kind of stumble into it. Like it's that TikTok in the mouth of source. And I would just, it's tricky, Molly, because you can really get caught up in the words and the images. I would just kind of let it go, and you might try another strategy is just watch it all happening, like you're in a self-driving car, and you're just watching it all be done. Our hair grows by ourselves. Our breath all day long is happening by itself. We're not doing the majority of what's happening. And in that way, that's kind of another angle. You can play with it. Just watch it all just happening. All of a sudden a person arises here and there and something's happening. You're just watching the whole movie, watching it all be done. Even when you do the dishes, watch how it's just all being done. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then that's kind of a different angle where and then you can even ask, like, how is it that this happens? Trees are growing by themselves. The sun's coming up every day. You're not doing it. What is it that makes all this happen? So that can be more of an awe kind of discovery mode. Like, how is it I even moved from here to there? Or that I ended up at the store or in bed tonight? Like, just get in the awe of, you think you're doing it, but there's really no doer here. And the awe of it, my teacher said the other day, he goes, Amita, who put the right amount of space between things? And I was like, I never thought about that. He's like, somehow there's the right amount of space. If there wasn't, you couldn't see or hear or move. He's like, somebody put the right amount of space between humans and planets and trees. And I was like, wow, you're right. So there's so much to see that allows all this to happen. That's not you, Molly. And so that's another angle. I don't know if that helps or not. Just watching it all be done. Rajesh, I'm sorry, how do you say your name? You have your hand up? Rajesh,
Yes, it's Rajesh. Sorry, I was muted.
you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So I'm going to try and explain my question. Now, I understand when you say you watch all these things happening, and there's a question, why are they happening? So thoughts are arising, feelings are coming, the body is reacting to the thoughts that might be happening. And you see all of those things happening, and some of the things that are happening are pretty unskillful. The thoughts that are arising may be unskillful, and the feelings they are creating in the body might be very unpleasant. And
Mhm.
you understand that you're not doing it, right?
Mhm.
I say to myself, I'm not doing this, it's just happening, right? But at the same time, the experience is very unpleasant. And so the question becomes, what do I do next? In other words, yes, I see all this happening. And now I know you said you need to look at who is the observer, but when you're going through this unpleasant experience or unpleasant thoughts or memories which are arising, and you're saying, I don't know why I thought about that. It's just arose, right? And I'm seeing all of this, but the experience can be quite unpleasant. And so the question that comes to my mind is like, so what's next? What's the next thing that one needs to do other than just observing? How does one change the underlying phenomena so that unpleasant thoughts don't arise, unpleasant feelings don't arise, or the relationship between the thought and the feeling is not there, right? The thought is just a thought, but it doesn't create the feeling in the body, right? In other words, I don't know if I have clearly explained, because I think there's several questions in that one statement.
The only thing that comes to mind when you were talking is to try switching out the you in there and just say, when those thoughts and feelings arise, infinite love would do what? Awareness itself would do what? And then maybe we can take that straw away. And that might give you a better sense of skillful means in those situations. And it might give you less attachment to, or less pushing away, grasping or clinging or aversion in those moments. How would infinite love relate to this? How would just pure awareness or life itself, empty Buddha nature, relate to that thought? Because your conditioning's coming in, which is fine. Then how would empty Buddha nature relate to your conditioning coming, to the character's conditioning coming in, or to this experience? You can switch it to how would empty Buddha nature relate to this? And then you're practicing stepping outside your character's conditioned way of relating to thoughts and emotions. So we're trying to reverse engineer the self. We're trying to trick the mind out of its normal way of relating to thoughts and emotions. When infinite love is meeting this sound, it might not be unpleasant at all. I mean, try it out and see for yourself. And it's not just imagination. You are empty Buddha nature, and you're your character. So we're just not making stuff up here. Might as well practice what this other possibility is. Empty Buddha nature hearing this sound feels like this, versus my character hearing this sound feels like this. And see if there's a difference. Hopefully there is. I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of a small kind thing for you to try out. I mean, like you said, it's a big issue, a big question. Basically, it's how to not have our conditioning and step outside our conditioning. So that's like a microdosing trick. It's to switch out the perspective. The I perspective is what creates the suffering. So try on a different perspective.
So if you don't mind, I would like to kind of follow up on what you said.
Mhm.
And if you don't mind, I'm trying to formulate my thoughts. I know you talked about aversion, and I guess there is some aversion, but it's not so much the aversion, but the recognition that what is happening is unskillful, or what is happening is, in a sense, or I guess the mind thinks that what is happening is, in a sense, not what needs to change in some way to get closer to your true nature, right? Or the empty nature, as you're calling it. So it's not so much the aversion to that, it's just the kind of a recognition that there has to be something that needs to be done. And I guess what you're saying is that you ask the question, right? And hopefully the answer will come, or the shift will occur.
Yeah. You change out the perspective, the shift might occur. Change out, how much attachment or unskillfulness would there be if it was empty Buddha nature seeing this or doing this? This isn't a practice I would use much for anybody because people have a reaction to it, but I find it's useful, and you could try it on just because you're kind of heading this direction. My teacher constantly tells me, Amita, nothing's happening. Nothing is happening. Any more than, you're in a dream state, and when you wake up, you realize nothing happened. Something did happen. It seemed like something happened at the night, but you were never left the bed. You were in a dream state. So I constantly try on, even though I'm not there yet, right, where he's at. I try on this, nothing's happening. And I thought initially it would make me apathetic or disconnected. And it's actually the most beautiful practice. Nothing's happening. So your mind might think about an unskillful thought, but if you try on, nothing's happening, okay? You'll probably see you don't even want to do this thing. Or if you do it, you do it with complete love. It's like you in a dream state. And it doesn't make you end up killing people or overeating, or like the guy in Groundhog Day. He did all these crazy things when he had the same day over and over again. If you just try this on, nothing's happening. You'd still probably listen to the Dharma. You'd still sit on a cushion. You just don't take things. It's just so much more playful. You'll be inclined more towards skillful means. You'll be inclined more towards love. If nothing's happening, then you just do the Leela, the play, right? You'll still go to work. You'll still be with your kids, but there'll just be this sense of it's all love, and every choice you make will be from love. If nothing's happening, the Buddha even said this, like they were like, well, why do you meditate? You're fully enlightened. They asked him, and he said, well, look, of all the things I could do in a day, it's one of the better things to do. I don't need to meditate. And you'll be like that when you do this nothing's happening practice. It's just so much fun. You'll find yourself doing good things and not doing crappy things because there's no pressure. It takes the pressure off. And if nothing's happening, then who's the you that's going to become like the skillful guy or the enlightened guy. That it just gets really funny. So if that has any resonance with you, play around with it, okay? And let me know how it goes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. I think it'll make it more fun for you. Oh, and we still take life completely deeply and utter compassion and utter love when nothing is happening. But then there's no you to wake up. I still practice when nothing's happening. Irene, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I do. So something that happens to me often in my meditation, or especially lately, I don't know, is that I get my mind fairly quiet. Sometimes there's no thoughts, and which I never thought I'd be able to say, but sometimes that happens. But even still, there'll be a strong sense of a me that's in my head, that's behind my eyes, even with, no identifying. It's just like a sense that I have. And I've tried different ways of working with that sort of inquiry of like, is that me behind my eyes? Is that, me in front of the back of my head, that type of thing. And something else that I did, but it's unpleasant. It definitely has a feeling of selfing. And so another thing I've tried doing is just bringing my awareness down into, like, I seem to be, because of my conditioning, very averse to being present in my body. So I try to bring my awareness down into just feeling the breath in the belly and just trying to stay right there, as opposed to being up here in my head. And a whole lot of dualism going on there. I'm hearing, but and that does feel like it's helpful, but it also feels very effortful, which I kind of try to stay away from in my meditations, of like forcing my attention somewhere. But I don't know. I just wondered if you had any ideas about that or how to work with it.
Yeah, I have a felt sense for you about this that may or may not work. It sounds like you're kind of getting caught in your head thing, especially going to eyes, and that's near the brain, and it's all getting kind of tangled up in there. And when you go down to the breath, it doesn't quite work, but go to the heart. The heart is aware. And actually, in the Buddhist time, when they asked him where the mind was, he pointed to both the heart and the head. And the word chitta in Pali actually means both heart and mind. So really, we're seeing and feeling and noticing everything via the portal. The heart is like a portal. And if you can, just drop below the neck. And the heart is like rocking everything at a level that's amazingly deep and fast. And you can start, just experiment on this. Don't let your mind try to worry about getting it right. Just like, how is the heart experiencing this situation? It's a little different than the mind. How's the heart experiencing it? It's kind of a different vibration, Irene, you'll notice. And if that's all you notice, is like, oh, the heart feels it differently. And what's trippy is when you think about it developmentally, when you were a fetus in the womb, the first thing that developed was the heartbeat. And the heartbeat created the brain. The heartbeat was first. So your heart is primary. It's really the only means of connection and communication. And what it does is it goes up to the brain, and the brain's like an interpreter. And but as you get deeper and more skilled in your meditation, and Deepama did this, it's just heart to heart. And Ramana Maharshi said, when heart speaks to heart, there's nothing left to say. So more and more you'll get deeper than language. There'll just be this kinesthetic, almost like a vibration of getting and receiving. And it's, you have to play around with it. But the heart is, it's a sense tool of knowing that is kind of infinite. And a lot of traditions, you look at Ramana Maharshi and some other, non-dual traditions, they really saw the heart as the portal for meditation. We don't focus so much on that in Vipassana. I metta sort of does, but we do the belly or the breath.
Right.
So experiment with that. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about what I'm saying about?
No, it makes sense. I see myself doing something probably more effortful, like trying to breathe in and out through my chest. But you're saying just be with the heart. And
yeah, and your heart has a natural way it's receiving things.
Mm.
In a natural way, it's also connecting. And I did a meditation, a short one on Insight Timer called Ask Your Heart. You could look with that and that might help you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The heart's its own thing. Its own like persona. So start to get to know it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And let me know how it goes. It's such a fun practice. It just adds like 3D when you start doing the heart thing. Yeah. Okay. So anything more, Irene? Is that good? You feel good?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have another Schmidt here. Alan has his hand raised, and then
Hello,
Robin, I'll get
greetings.
to your question. Hi.
Hi. So one of the practices that I was recently working with is through the elements. So the body is the earth element. Everything is either earth element, a combination of earth element, water element, fire element, wind element, as the Buddha taught, and there's no self there. So would you comment on that?
That's a great practice. I should have included that in the talk. Yeah. No, it's true. It just, when you really get down to it, the thoughts are wind element, right? Yeah. No, that's a great way to just see it. Great winds taking you across the sky. No, I love that. The important thing, Ellen, is what works for you to disidentify, unsticking from that flypaper of a separate self. So perfect. Yeah. That's a great thing. I wish I'd included that, but it's perfect. So Raman wrote something in the, anything else, Alan? Does that, I don't have anything else other than say than right on.
Fine. That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. Robin wrote, as a psychotherapist, oftentimes those experiencing trauma may not even know about how to find the love, self-compassion, or be caught in the me-selfing unwholesome patterns of behaviors. Please share the ways, your ways to begin to share these practices in a simple way. Yeah.
I can clarify that. Please
Sure.
assume.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My camera's off because I'm going through, I have gone through some surgery, and so that's why it's off. I am not a psychotherapist. I was looking at your training besides mindfulness and Buddhism. So that is another layer to bring into this. I work as a peer mentor dealing with individuals in recovery from eating disorders. So in that type of a work and working with those individuals, oftentimes there is that loss of self, or that not identifying, or trauma, or whatever we want to call it, that becomes a self. So it's a very interesting way of using mindfulness and meditation to become aware of patterns of behavior and images and thoughts from wherever they have come and how they are exhibited through, as Rajesh was saying, unwholesome patterns. So I'm just wondering, with your training as a psychotherapist as well, some of those simple identification parts of the non-self, because first you have to be able to identify, in my opinion, where these thoughts are coming from to be able to get to that point. And I hope I'm making myself clear. And I like your little activities to help engage those conversations with others.
Thanks. And I just want to have a caveat that, the talk I gave today is for advanced Dharma practitioners, people undergoing a lot of trauma and really in the depth of addictions or big issues. I wouldn't necessarily recommend some of these practices. I do what's called parts work, internal family systems work, and I think it's important. It's a beautiful tool. It's a relatively newish tool in the therapy world, but it's a beautiful tool because it has you look at parts and the behaviors of certain parts. Like you might have an angry part or a self-harming part or a binge eating part, right? But you're seeing that part from this witness you, this wise self you. And so it brings almost like the not self you into play with these parts that are caught and lost. And it's such a beautiful tool if you haven't heard of it, because it really is a non-judgmental awareness of our parts. And even with the IFS, with people have a suicidal part, you can just talk to it, and all parts are trying to help. You find when somebody wants to kill themselves, they often that part's trying to kill some kind of pain. And if you can help that part with the pain that it's trying to kill and help it see that, it'll take out other parts when it does that. It just is so non-judgmental and so balancing in people's system to look at it from this greater wise self. So that's kind of a therapy tool that kind of combines this not self with trauma parts and includes all of it. And what's beautiful that I've seen in working with this tool, and I'm sorry if I'm over anybody's head with all this stuff, but every part, even a part that's compulsive eating or doing these unskillful behaviors like a previous person talked about, every part at the essence of every part is your true nature, is this quote, wise self, Buddha nature, empty Buddha nature, wise self. Even at the core, if you went deep enough, even in a self-harming part, you'd find empty Buddha nature. So you can kind of pull these things and help them open up from the inside out. And then you can bring self-energy to all parts, this empty Buddha nature, this wise Buddha nature to all parts, and you can illuminate from within each part. It's just exponential what you can do when people are caught in parts. And to name it, okay, because we're so good at labeling, to name it makes a huge difference. This is a part of me that feels impulsive about eating now, right? In your work. And just naming it, they know, moves it from the brain stem where there's a trauma. Just putting a label moves it from the brain stem to the prefrontal cortex, where you have way more efficacy with that behavior. So labeling it, labeling parts, bringing this wise self energy to it. I mean, the key really, the last thing I'll say is it's like we have a big bus full of all these parts, the parts that overeat or drink or say the wrong things, or fun parts too. A bus full of kids, right? 50 kids in this bus, or 20 kids, right? And the idea is you don't have all the different kids grabbing the wheel of the bus and don't have licenses to drive. your 3-year-old that wants to just compulsively eat, not driving the bus. You always have this wise self, this anti-Buddha nature driving the bus. And then the little kid comes up, hey, we want to stop at the ice cream store. You're like, no, we're not going to be able to do that today. And then the wise self is taking in the information from all your parts that want to do this and want to do that. And it's always driving the bus. You don't get rid of anybody. Everyone's here. But your wise, skillful self's always driving more and more and more, versus normally when things go wrong in people's psychology, it's because they have a heart that's 14 years old driving in the middle of the bus, or 2 years old and taking the car or the bus a long ways down the road and hitting a lot of objects. So this is just a way to or imagery to get a sense of what we're doing here. Your wise self's always driving. Parts will say their needs and inform to the wise you driving the bus. And more you get that wise you driving the bus. And all the parts are here and you love them all. They're all your kids. They're wonderful. But they don't get to grab the wheel. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much. I just think of the wheels on the bus go round and round.
That's cute. Somebody wrote, in IFS, all our pronouns would be they. No, everybody's different. And a lot of times people will say the part is a he or she. You can have men that have female parts, or their anger part might be a woman or a man. Sometimes I've worked with people who identified as they and all their parts were they. It really just depends on the person. And I remember working with one kind of macho guy, and he had a female part and he was kind of bothered by that. He didn't like that, female part. And he got used to it eventually. But it's such a great tool, because ultimately, I'll say one more thing about it. Thinking, in IFS, there's protectors and exiles, and there's another thing called firefighters. But thinking is a protector part. Ultimately, it's not your true nature. Your true nature is a silent presence. So thinking is ultimately this protector that's rare. And you sit down on the cushion, you try to just connect with you, and this protector called thinking, and right? And if you can just say, oh, thank you, it's trying to keep us from, I don't know why, but it's often trying to keep us from dropping into our true nature. It's like afraid of the silence. And I did a meditation again on Insight Timer, working with your thinking part as a protector. All these things are free, by the way. Because ultimately, thinking is just another part. And more, you'll just see that your wordless true nature, just all there is. Even when words come out of your mouth, you're not identifying with the words or the thoughts anymore. Like I said, it gets less and less and less. You're dissolving back into the unconditioned. And when parts get, you just watch what resists that. Like I said, it's consent. So watch what resists that dissolving back into the unconditioned, the source, the awareness itself. And lastly, Robin, sometimes I try to have people watch their stories. They really loop. A lot of my clients that really have the most difficulty, they loop around and around and around their stories. And even if you can just have people go, look, you're looping in a story, just step out, see that looping whether it's a self-hatred thought or an obsessive thought, if people can just see that looping nature of mind, that alone can help them somewhat. Because when they step outside the looping, they're often in that quiet awareness for a minute. And the last thing I'd suggest you do, don't relate to everybody's dysfunction and messed upness. Like I was telling Irene, drop into your heart or your solar plexus or your core and have your awakeness meet theirs and grow their awakeness. I don't even bother with people's story and stuff anymore. I mean, it's there and we talk about it, but I just have my awakeness hone in on where they're already free. And I can feel it in everybody's body where they're already free. And everybody's already free somewhere. Okay. And just hone in on that. And then even as you're talking to them and they're telling their story, you just turn the dial up on your awakeness and on their awakeness, kind of like a meta practice, and just, and if that's all you do in your sessions with people, it's just, you're saying, I see who you really are. And then you're just honing in on that, almost like their true nature, you're growing it rather than you're trying to chip away at all the clouds. Just grow their true nature. So experiment with that. It's not easy. If you have any more questions, you're welcome to email me. My email, I'm gonna, maybe Irene, you could put it in, it's my name, Amita Schmidt @gmail.com. If you want to be on my mailing list, I only teach like once or twice a year. You're probably not on my mailing list. So if you want to hear about stuff that I'm doing, Amita Schmidt @gmail.com. Yes. I'm going to give a talk about AI later this year because I'm fascinated by what that means dharmically, what these changes in technology could mean for us as practitioners. A lot of positive things, actually, especially around illusion and truth. So if you want to be part of that, hear that talk, let me know. I think we're out of time. Doesn't seem like there's anything more. Again, if there's anything more you need, just email me. Tom, did you want to say something really quick?
I read your book and I loved it. Thank you very much. The mind telling the stories within the stories, within the stories. And from that, I imagined that I was the story, that myself was the story told by the mind. It was very powerful. I enjoyed it, and thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing. May you fully awaken into that truth. Okay, well, it was a blessing to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for joining me on this Friday night. And may each one of you consent to the truth and the love and become that.